Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Cleveland Heights Council Public Safety and Health Committee public hearing regarding our deer population. It's April 29th, 2025. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jim Posh. I'm the chair. I'd like to introduce Gail Larson, our vice chair. Are you here tonight?
I am here.
Thank you. That's for the record. We have Councilmember Cobb, member of this committee. Are you here tonight?
I'm here.
You have to use the little button so it's all red.
Present.
Present.
How about that?
We have a council member, Petrus. Jim Petrus is in the audience, and I don't believe we have any other elected officials. I'd like to begin by introducing our panelist. We have Jonathan Cepek. Am I pronouncing it right? Cepek. A wildlife ecologist from the Cleveland Metro Parks. We have Jeffrey Westerfield from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And we have James Marino from Precision Wildlife Management. All three bring a tremendous amount of expertise working with our local peer communities, neighboring communities on what they do to just sort of analyze and look at our deer population. I have a little bit of a statement I'd like to start with just so everybody understands. I think some people are assuming that we're making some decisions tonight, but we're not. We are not here to make any decisions. Rather, we are here to listen, learn, and ask questions. This seems to be a serious issue with many challenging perspectives. With this in mind, if we're ready to consider any action, including the possibility of no action, you have my word. With whatever process we choose, we're going to be careful, respectful, and transparent. As leaders, we need information, data, and community feedback to do our job. That's why we're here today. This is likely the first step of many. And again, we're here to talk about our deer population. Council Member Larson and myself were down in Mansfield about 2 weeks ago with other city officials. Not anybody else from Cleveland Heights, but city officials across the state of Ohio. And the three folks that you see here, two of them presented, one was in attendance. John was one of our lead presenter, and he's going to do an abbreviated version of that presentation for you this evening. And this is just to sort of get some basic information about what other people do. How do you measure your deer population? Is it a problem? Is it not? But I'd like to turn this over to John to get started with. So. We could be one happy family and move the chairs pretty much around anywhere. So if we need more chairs, if you can't see, feel free to come over here. You can sit in a council chair, a council chair if you want, although that's kind of like a target these days.
Okay, thank you everyone for allowing me the opportunity to share some information about deer tonight. I wasn't sure what to call this, but I've used this title before. So I'm a wildlife ecologist with Cleveland Metro Parks. So that's my perspective, is talk about ecology, about functioning ecosystems. I have a park perspective, but I've been doing wildlife research, monitoring, management it's been almost 30 years for the National Wildlife Research Center, for the federal government for the last 10 years, thankfully with the Cleveland Metro Parks, which has been a great organization to work for. So, how did we get here, right? So before we really dive into deer, and situations we have, I want to talk, I often ask in the Cleveland Metro Parks, what's the most influential species, as an ecologist, and talking about ecosystems in the park. And beaver always comes up. We're not here to talk about beaver tonight, but my point to this is, when we think about an influential species, and beaver certainly can influence the landscape when we think about flooding and landscape changes. But when we look at Seoul, South Korea in 1900, and then 10 million people later, I would put human beings as the most influential species on the planet, right? And so that's where we're going to start here, is we're going to talk a lot. An interesting thing, I was asked to write an article last year about some new conservation finds in the Cleveland Metro Parks. And one of the points I made is in Western science, we often don't put a human in any ecological diagram. So, I always challenge people, if you find a picture of a human in, trophic cascades, trophic levels, predator-prey relationships, ecosystem function, we don't have humans. So we don't often think about ourselves in the system. So when we think about that, no matter if I'm asked to come talk about coyotes or white-tailed deer or black bears or wild turkeys in our streets now, these generalist species that adapt to us, to urban areas, it's always about wildlife and people. So we're going to start there. So I ask us to think about ourselves as a species and our influence in a system, because this really is about people and wildlife. And the points to any talk I make about adaptation in the urban, I'm an urban wildlife ecologist, right? Is that humans have changed our landscape, wildlife have adapted, and guess what? We continue to influence behavior, but we often don't realize of that because we're not thinking about ourselves as a species within the system. So let's just put ourselves in the system and think about our changes to the landscape. So bear with me as I tell my story, but we are certainly going to get to deer, but we really need to talk about how we got here. When we look at, this is a graphic from the Ohio Division of Wildlife. When Ohio became a state in 1803, Ohio was primarily forested, right? And we had our native populations, our native ecology functioning systems, and it probably looked like something on the right. Well, we don't know what our indigenous population numbers were. But on top of that, we know from census that new settlers that moved into Ohio were almost 5 million in 100 years' time. And we see a corresponding loss of 85% of our forest. 20 million acres of forest was lost in that time because of human change to the landscape. So by 1883, we lead the nation in wheat farming, and you don't farm wheat in a forest because we have significantly changed the landscape. And this is really important to understand. It's because at the time we were living off the land. So farming and agriculture was a primary use of clearing the land. Harvest wasn't regulated, right? So we were subsistence hunting from your family, but it wasn't regulated, and realized we could make money. So we began market hunting deer and other animals, and we trapped predators for fur or because of threats to our livestock or our farm animals over time. So nothing was regulated, and this took a toll. So I primarily deal with mammals, it's my background. But 15 native species were lost from Ohio, extirpated from Ohio by people in 100 years during this time. So these are native Ohio species. So the last record of wood bison was 1803, extirpated from Ohio's forests, Ohio's boundaries. Elk were gone by 1840, cougar disappeared, wolves disappeared, lynx, our original native populations of bobcat, were gone by 1855, black bear, the native populations by 1881. Deer became so rare that in 1882, when land was donated for the first zoo in Wade Park, 14 deer were donated as the primary exhibit at the zoo. Deer are so rare in Ohio at that time. So can you imagine going to the zoo today for white-tailed deer? So interesting fact, if you go to the current Cleveland Metro Park Zoo, and you go to eat ice cream from that place right there, there's a plaque on the wall. That was the original deer farm in the late 1800s, deer barn. But that tells you how rare deer were in the late 1800s. And then by 1904, according to Division of Wildlife Records, they're extirpated from the state of Ohio. So we know they're back. That's what we're here to talk about. But my point to this is because human landscape changed, caused deer to disappear from Ohio's boundaries by 1904. So when we look at a 100-year change, we can see that significant loss to forest, right? And a corresponding loss to species that were using that landscape and that natural habitat, and from human change. But it was this species, not a mammal, but the passenger pigeon, which is the most abundant bird in North America, that was driven to extinction by humans by 1900, the most abundant bird in North America. So humans are a very influential species. So that loss of passenger pigeon caused the federal government to start putting in Migratory Bird Treaty Act protection laws, established the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to manage and regulate, established at the state level, the Ohio Division of Wildlife, to manage and regulate these resources so that somebody who wanted to hunt them could as a resource, or harvest the fur as a resource, but we can't drive them to extinction so everybody else can enjoy them as well. So Humans changed the landscape again post-World War II. So 1940 to 1994, we can see this addition of green space. So part of it was that last 4 million acres of forest, that 15% of forest that survived our first change. But what this is people moving off farms and moving into the suburbs. And also now we have the US Forest Service and the Ohio Division of Forestry that's planting new forest. So another change by humans. So surprise, deer came back in the 1930s, right? That's what we're here to talk about. So another 100 years, now 2003, we can see we have new green and we have species that come back because now our conservation, we're a bit more conservation minded, things are regulated, and we're doing a better job with things. But we're gonna talk about deer. And when we talk about deer, we often think about deer in this natural setting, right? But they were gone. But when they came back to a much different landscape. So that deer that existed in pre-1800s in that contiguous forest of Ohio, that's not what it came back to. It came back to a landscape changed with an abundance of human-provided resources like crops here. Its natural competitors, these large herbivores, like elk and bison, they didn't come back. So it has no competition now. And the natural predators that kept populations in check, they did not return either, right? So this is a very different landscape. I ask you to take a step back. My goal is not to make everybody a hunter. But as an ecologist, we also have to realize that humans did play a role historically as a predator on the landscape. We know that from records. We know that when people had to live off the land when the land was settled. But let's face it, right? Now we don't subsistence hunt. We can go to the store. So often hunting is what we would call recreational. We're not using it to survive. However, there's also, we may not even eat meat, right? So we may not have any reason to harvest a deer or any other animal. But I need to step away on a tangent here because I'm speaking to you as a wildlife professional. And as a wildlife professional, Lydia Parker spoke at our National Wildlife Professional Conference. So she is indigenous, she's a member of the Mohawk clan. And in an urbanizing society, getting youth outdoors from her culture to get out, value nature, think conservation minded, what she found was she was trying to connect them with the outdoors and try to give them opportunities to hunt and harvest their own food relative to their culture. And she found that modern society was vehemently opposed to that. And it really made me think, what is our perspective of hunting, right? Especially if we don't need to do it and we live in suburban areas where hunting isn't common when we're talking about playing the role of a predator. So Tovar Cerulli was a vegan that spoke at our state Ohio Wildlife Program. And he talked about he went vegan because at the time, he did not want to eat something that was commercially produced. He wanted to know where his food came from. And sooner or later, he came along the line that there are a lot of deer on the landscape and I know where they came from. I'm gonna try hunting. So it was really another interesting perspective on why people may hunt. So I thought about that, and I think when I go into this and I mention, humans playing a role, what do we think about hunting, right? So if we don't grow up hunting, we don't know anybody's a hunter, where do we get our information? Do we think it's high-powered rifles in backyards when we're talking about this in urban areas? Or archery, are we thinking about English longbowmen randomly launching arrows long distances, right? This isn't modern hunting. Urban hunting, it may be surprised, my point to this, as the hunters I work with are often very conservation minded. They're harvesting for food and they often are donating the venison. Modern archery equipment is not that shotgun being shot in the air in a backyard, right? Shotgun gun hunting occurs in some areas, but we're not talking about this in urban areas. And I'm not even saying this is just general. I'm not even pushing management or hunting in this. I'm just talking about opening our mind when we're thinking about these situations. Hunting, modern urban hunting is often done from elevated stands, right? You're shooting down, you're identifying your target at short range safely. There's hunter education. This isn't the hunting of 150 years ago that wasn't regulated. It is regulated by the Ohio Division of Wildlife. So when this comes up, I just thought, because I was spoken to at my professional conference at the state level and the federal level, that when this comes up and we're talking about deer, if we don't understand this, then, so I'm just offering a different perspective. But let me go back, okay, back to my story. So we know Ohio's human population continued to grow past that 5 million I mentioned in 1900, right? So we're almost at, in 2010, we're a little bit over 11.5 million people in Ohio. What's interesting about this is when we think about those 11.5 million people and changes to Ohio's landscape, almost 80% of our population, almost 9 million people, live on less than 10% of the land. So these areas, our suburban, our metropolitan, our urban areas, which is where we're at, right? This is another change to the landscape. And in these areas, I can assure you, you can ask and buy me coffee, I'll tell you all kinds of stories about humans and wildlife in my career, right? But we certainly influence wildlife, and that's what I want to provide some background to. So let's consider the differences in this urban landscape I'm talking about, right? So we're going to compare this to what Ohio historically may have looked like, or when we think about a natural, I'll call it an undeveloped area. As an urban ecologist, we always talk about what is urban, what is urbanization, but in my mind, it is a human change to the landscape, right? Development. It is some human change to a natural landscape. And we're also, let's talk about wildlife habitat, which is any land that can be used as shelter, breeding ground, or a food source for wildlife. And often I get the question, John, why is your animal from the Metro Park in my backyard? Well, let's think about our backyards as habitat. Because often it's not mine, it's ours. But another change to this landscape in this urban area is that even the existing forest or the new forest, what did we do in metropolitan areas? We carved it up and fragmented it, right? Subdivisions, shopping malls, cemeteries, golf courses, parks, all the things, and we fragment this. So another change. And if we think about this, the more we fragment something, the more edge, the white line we increase, right? If we think about natural areas and go to our right, which is more like we're at, in that middle to the right, guess what species love edge? Deer, right? There's higher biodiversity at edge. It's a balance between cover and food resources seasonally between the field and the forest. Deer love edge, they thrive. And guess what? We provide a lot of it in these systems. And we provide safe, quiet backyards. It's what I want for my children, right? Well, wildlife figure out that it's safe and quiet. And why is it safe and quiet? Because, well, we remove the predators. And also, so another point to this, culturally, right? If we thought back in the 1800s and we cut down trees and carved out some land and we built our log cabin and we had a farm field, where were the wildlife? They were out in the forest. So as the cabins built into villages and townships, right, we didn't develop hunting and trapping ordinances in there because we went out into the forest. Well, we have built it and they have come, and now we're talking about wildlife that have adapted to our areas, but often our culturally, our mindedness for trapping wildlife management in cities, we don't have ordinances in place for that because it didn't make sense 150 years ago, and here we are in this different situation. But how do people influence wildlife? Well, intentionally feeding. Whatever your motivation is, intentional feeding incredibly influences wildlife. Unintentional feeding. We don't plant our hostas or our tomato garden or put our bird feeders out, right, for deer, but they figure it out. And so do raccoons and chipmunks and squirrels and all these other generalist species we see high densities of in urban areas. And guess what? We restock those bird feeders. We replant the hostas, we replant the tomatoes, we replant our gardens. And we complain about it. My wife yells me and tells me I'm a terrible wildlife biologist, but we keep replanting them, right? So if we think about resource availability, a deer is a browser. So usually they eat a few leaves, but let's say they eat all the leaves on the plant. Well, they have to find another plant to eat or they don't survive, right? So simple kind of math ecologically. But if they eat our arborvitae, in an urban area, we just wait for the next buy one, get one, and we replant it. And we complain. So my point to this is we are artificially providing resources at a faster rate than it would replenish itself in a natural system. So Taylor Redioff is a PhD student from University of New Hampshire. I'm on her committee. She's in Dr. Rem Maul's lab. He's worked with us historically in the Cleveland Metro Parks, and one of her chapters was on urban deer reproduction, and she just published that. So I thought I'd share some interesting findings. What she found, deer fecundity, so deer reproduction, was almost completely decoupled from environmental drivers, winter severity, growing season, precipitation, and acorn mass. So kind of the natural things. Results suggest that urban deer populations in the Cleveland region are not resource limited like they would be in a natural system. So fawns, newborn deer, may have access to adequate forage even during winter, and they may benefit from these supplemental food sources from humans, anthropogenic food sources like gardens, bird feeders, and direct supplemental feeding. So this is our research findings. Reproductive rates also imply the necessity of continued management by the Cleveland Metro Parks and surrounding municipalities to avoid population size approaching carrying capacity. So these were some takeaways from her paper. So if we think about natural ecological cycles, let me illustrate this a little bit. And we think about winter as a natural time of stress to a wildlife population. So if you have a drought or you have low resources, right, animals are coupled to the natural system, but they survive. So contrary to what modern humans may think, deer have survived for millennia without being fed. And they're linked to those natural resources. And if it's a stressful year and there's not as many resources, those animals may not survive the winter, or they may not breed, or they may not have as many young, right? Because it doesn't make sense to have a lot of young if there's not resources. So they're coupled or linked. So this is what Taylor was getting at. But what do we do in the winter? Instead of linking that to the resources, we decouple it by providing food resources in urban areas so deer come out proverbially fat and happy, right? But they're at the highest level of fitness, they have the maximum number of young, and the young are as the healthiest they possibly could be and they have maximum survivability. So this is what happens in urban areas. Let me step away and also talk about how feeding changes wildlife behavior, because that is not natural. That is not natural. Deer, we should have a respectful distance between wildlife and ourselves, right? Wildlife should be wary of us. But this is a learned behavior. So that animal that is either fed or that adult that it can overcome its stress and take advantage of a backyard resource, even though they don't want to be around us, the young that are then born are born into a more natural system to them, or a more normal, less stressful situation. So each generation we see this adaptation, and we're seeing it with turkeys, we've seen it with geese, with raccoons and other species. So this is a learned behavior. But I also ask, you know, though we may love animals, I certainly went into this profession because I love animals, right? Are we doing the best thing by teaching children to feed directly and influence our behavior and theirs? So we have to think about our culture and where we are, because changing behavior, deer lose their natural fear. So if we think about natural activity from a deer, if it sees us, fight or flight, it's typically flight, right? That we're gonna see the white tail in a natural area with natural deer behavior, without feeding, without this urban influence. But if we can lure that animal in, whatever our motivation, and feed it, well, then all of a sudden it starts associated with food, and then it's totally comfortable to just hang out until somebody feeds it, right? That is not normal. And then I get reports of deer following people and licking them. That is concerning, that is not normal, right? And that is because humans have changed that behavior. So here, if this plays, this is a backyard. These are two young of the year deer. They were born that year, it's later in the year, so they don't have spots. But not only are they not scared, they're curious. Somebody has fed these animals, so they're not scared of me. But the most concerning thing to me as a wildlife professional is there's the mother, right? And she is not stomping her feet to defend her young. She's not teaching them to flee. She's also interested in me. So this shows me that somebody has modified that behavior by feeding. Those deer are so comfortable in our backyard that we've seen a changed behavior. And what happens is that cute little button buck with nubs on its head that maybe you may have fed or hand raised and it now licks people, right, walks around. Well, all of a sudden when it's got antlers and it's in fall, when its hormones are up and it's territorial defending resources before a time of winter, right, that can be risky. And I may end up on the news over why somebody's having a barbecue and a buck disrupts the barbecue, and it's because the neighbors are feeding it, right? So now all of a sudden, just like turkeys, when we get into April and May, that may think it's great around a bird feeder, all of a sudden now this is their time to be territorial when their hormones are up because of breeding and things, and we see defensive or aggressive behavior. The risk of this, so this was an article in Colorado. A woman had no interaction with deer before this. She's walking her dog and she's gored by a buck during the fall. And it turns out the neighbors had hand raised a buck. So, but Now, that was an article from a few years ago. Now I can refer to this happening in Ohio. These are 3 attacks in Ohio. And last year when I spoke in Columbus, given basically the same talk, somebody was talking about how their wife was stomped by a doe who wasn't being super aggressive, was trying to defend their young, but was so comfortable around us that they didn't see us as a threat. And we've broken down that barrier through these changes. So in the Cleveland Metro Parks, we have a no feeding ordinance, right? And so the goal to this is, and every city is whatever works for you, but this doesn't mean that I'm a scout leader, right? That with a Boy Scout merit badge working on bird study that, we're gonna go arrest him or cite him for, having a bird feeder, or somebody who has a bird feeder and responsibly maintains it. But if you have an issue with changing wildlife behavior or congregating wildlife or wildlife disease issues, having a no feeding ordinance at least helps the Cleveland Metro Parks to address it and try to educate. So for Cleveland Metro Parks, we have that no feeding ordinance and educational messages and also warnings about citations. But it's not meant to not appreciate wildlife. It's meant for these reasons I'm talking about. So really, we're talking about when we get here with deer, we have made it easy. And I do feel like as humans, we need to take some ownership to some of this, because deer didn't just decide that they wanted to be around us because we tell great jokes and we're great to hang around with, right? A little bit of population biology. If we think about 2 animals, our breeding stock on the left, when they breed, they typically, biologically, evolutionarily, have surplus young. And the reason for this is because nature takes its toll. So I don't think I have a pointer, but if you look at on the right, what is nature's toll? Starvation, disease, accidents, weather, hunting, predators. But we've evolved, or the animals have evolved, that with those tolls, there's still enough of the species to continue. But those tolls, those natural limiting things, are called a carrying capacity, right? And they limit the population growth. That's why we see that curve come back down. Well, if we take away in urban areas starvation, because they're certainly not starving, if we take away hunting, we take away predators, just as some examples, right? There's no limit to that population growth. So that population growth goes exponentially. I wanted to preface that because now we're going to look at Ohio's deer population. Remember, late 1800s, we're going to see deer at the zoo. They're gone until the 30s. And so when we look at this, it goes to 750,000 deer in about 50 years. If I would have had this on an answer in a population biology class in college, I would have failed because they would have said this is not possible. But it is in this urban landscape with deer and other species. This coincides when we look at that 1950 timeframe into the 70s to our suburbanization and urbanization. So how easy have we made it for wildlife in urban areas, in this case deer? Historically, we had 4 deer per square kilometer, and in a natural area, this still holds true. But in that same size area, when we think about habitat, we have enough resources, we have an environment we've created to support 10 times as many deer, 46 on average per square kilometer compared to a natural system. So this is why we're here talking about deer in urban areas. So people, let me be clear. I often hear, well, we have deer because they have nowhere to live and we've taken away their habitat. Well, maybe 150, 200 years ago we did, right? But there is a point where we didn't have deer. But we built it and they have come back. We have built this perfect scenario for those species that can adapt to us, but we often just don't realize that. So I'm not shaming all of us, but humans don't think about themselves and their influence, and that's what we're talking about here. And especially, that may not be consistent across, but it's certainly in urban areas. So let me talk about coyotes, because coyotes came into Ohio in 1919. As we changed the landscape, we opened it up for coyotes, we removed competition, and coyotes moved in. So we would say, well, what about coyotes? They're a predator. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. We also influenced coyote behavior. My graduate work was on coyotes. I can assure you we influenced coyote behavior, and people wonder why they're on their back steps, but that's a whole bowl of chipmunks that they don't have to hunt. When we think about protein, nutrient-rich pet food, all they have to do is overcome the pet. So don't leave pet food out on your porch. But when we think about walking through a neighborhood and counting squirrels and then walking through Hinckley or Brecksville or North Sugar Reservation, I guarantee you're going to count more squirrels and chipmunks and mice in backyards than you will in our park. Again, we have that high density of generalist species. So if you're a coyote, where would you go hunt chipmunks and squirrels? So when we look at Coyotes as predators of deer. This is a picture from one of my cameras in February, a time when a coyote should be stressed and hungry, and it's walking right by a deer. This is a picture of a coyote in late November, same thing, walking right by a deer. So coyotes don't need to rely on deer. They certainly can kill them and in some areas of the country take them, but with all these other things to eat, why would you play the role of a predator to take down an animal 5 times your size? You know, so we did a fawn survival study, collaring does and fawns and looking at predation rates from coyotes that were GPS collared. This was with Dr. Stan Garrett from The Ohio State University. Sarah Kennedy was the grad student. I inherited in 2014 this project. The findings show that 75% of fawns survive. Again, this would be me failing a population biology class because like there's no way that's possible, but 75%, we've seen that now with the curve. But there was only 5% predation from coyotes on fawns. So opportunistically, they would take fawns if they could. But unlike areas in maybe South Carolina or Georgia, where coyotes keep deer populations in check and have an 85% predation rate, right? They don't need to rely on deer here to survive. So they're not seeking deer out, and deer aren't avoiding them like they would in areas where there's high predation. So this was the result of this study. So coyotes really aren't playing a role of a predator in this, but we do find deer in their diet because it's documented. We hit 20,000 of them every year. So why hunt a live deer when you can just wait for one on the side of the road, right? And it's estimated that 68,000 are hit every year by State Farm, but 20,000 are documented annually killed. So people cause high densities of deer, but what are the consequences of this, right? Because we're talking about influence on population biology, but also behaviorally. So what are the consequences? Well, that's probably what I would imagine we're here to discuss tonight. And it could be damage to landscape. It could be injuries. It could be deer vehicle collisions or accidents, right? In the case of the Cleveland Metro Parks and my responsibilities, it's this loss of understory, right? As high as deer can browse in our parks. And we'll talk about that. What's interesting is I think this came out in, I have to think, maybe 2015. I meant to look up the date. Maybe 2012 is when this was discussed. But Lake Erie Allegheny Partnership for Biodiversity is a really diverse group that came up with a white-tailed deer management statement. But this is a great reference, I think, when we're having these discussions. But this group is so diverse. These are natural resources professionals and conservationists from Botanical Garden, Holden Arboretum, Nature Conservancy, the Audubon Society, all the way through wildlife management agencies like the Ohio Division of Wildlife or USDA Wildlife Services and Park. So really a diverse, but all agreed that there needed to be a statement to say, hey, here's the facts on what's going on with deer, and there are impacts to this ecologically from a conservation standpoint. And an interesting thing, when I'm asked to talk to cities, this goes back now 10 years, part of the plan is to encourage cities to work with the Ohio Division of Wildlife to just look at your situations and consider this, because deer don't stop at our borders, right? This is a regional issue. And it's not just a regional issue, it's a national issue. This is the cover of Time magazine in 2012. Now I hate this because deer are a conservation success. You could hate them, you could love them, but when we look at the fact that they were extirpated from Ohio, and we brought them back, and they're a part of our system as our only large herbivore, right? I hate them to be labeled as a pest because I think we're starting to lose some appreciation of wildlife value. We're talking about high densities and the results. This is a publication from 2023. Anything in blue has an urban deer program or urban deer information. And the states in orange don't have white-tailed deer. Yeah. So when we look at this, this is, and Ohio's one that has an urban deer management plan. So this was last year that this came out. But let's talk about Cleveland Metro Parks. And let me wrap this up with giving you some perspective just from the Cleveland Metro Parks and sharing some information about what we know. In 1998, Tom Stanley, who was a natural resources director, did this video. I'm not going to show you the video, but some snapshots. So in September of 1998, what he did is he went through some parks in the Cleveland Metro Parks, reservations. We have our reservations. And he went into the center of them. He went along a roadway and he went along a trail. And he filmed it. And so this is a typical forest. This is North Chagrin, and this is typically what it looked like. So we see healthy understory, forest regeneration, species like viburnum or dogwood, wildflowers, not that time of year, but in the spring we would. But this was a change, right? So I call this shifting baseline. So this is kind of what we see now. But if you're looking at this, and this is what all of our parks look like, and all of a sudden in Bedford and Brecksville, we see this. This is shocking, right? This may be more of a norm. It's not this bad now because we manage deer. But all of a sudden, there's no forest regeneration going on there, right? We're losing plant species there. And so we went from this to as high as deer could reach. And we started to map this and document this with the return of deer. So when we're thinking about forest regeneration and responsibilities to taxpayers to manage our forest, what we have on the left is not what we have with high densities of deer on the right, right? But there's also ecological impacts, right? So this isn't just about an anti-deer campaign, right? This is just one species at high densities that not only removes an understory, right? And the wildflowers or the plants that are in that understory, but what about the ground nesting songbirds that need that habitat? What about the small mammals? What about the invertebrates, right? So these are these ecological effects and cascades that interrupts ecosystem function. So professional responsibilities for the Cleveland Metro Parks, well, if we think about that, we're over 100 years old now. Our mission statement for our next 100 years is protecting nature, connecting communities, inspiring conservation of our world, right? An award-winning, I would say beloved, based on how our levies pass, park system. I know I love it as a resident, not just because I work for it, but I use it. So our responsibilities for natural resources are maintaining the health and diversity of the natural resources and managing native plant and wildlife populations to promote functioning ecosystems and identify, protect, and manage endangered species and habitat. Pretty straightforward, but this means we have some responsibilities for this within the park. But this is a point that I want to make. How confusing this could be if you're not familiar with this situation, we don't think about how this came about. Because when we talk about deer being attraction at the zoo, and deer are extirpated, and then the Cleveland Metro Parks is established in 1917, so at that point we didn't have deer. So the Emerald Necklace publication, deer return in the 30s, as I mentioned, but the Emerald Necklace had an article that talked about the excitement of the first deer track. All of Natural Resources jumped in a van to go see the first deer track. We probably don't do that now. And then in 1967, there's an article about excitement of deer in all the reservations. This is a conservation success and very exciting. What we didn't realize is the return to that change system and what the effects would be. So in 1997, we worked with the state to request permission to begin removing deer because of these effects. So we could sound like crazy people if we didn't explain this, right? So this is why I'm here to try to explain some of this situation, because why do we go from excitement to all of a sudden talking about removing? But think about that curve and that population curve. We all have opinions. We're humans, right? This is the different from wildlife species. We have opinions, we have emotions. I'm a temperamental Irish guy. You can ask my wife, she'll tell you. But really, I think you don't want me to manage wildlife based on if I'm having a good day, a bad day, if I love that one or I hate that one, or, you want me to use data and science. So we use science-based decision-making in the park. We have a lot of resources and natural resources that maybe cities and the average park system doesn't have, but we use those to monitor in wildlife and rep. But my point is there is information out there that you can look at. But we do wildlife monitoring. We obviously monitor deer activity. We have to, the state requires that for our permits, various ways. And we also measure deer impact because sometimes it doesn't matter what the numbers are, it's what the results are. If it's deer vehicle collisions for a city or damage, in our case, it's impact to forest regeneration. So I just wanted to show you this. We planted dogwood and some understory trees inside a fence. And I asked the person doing it to plant a couple on the outside because I wanted to see, this is a new property we had just inherited. There had been no management going on. So we planted the trees, deer showed up, and in 6 days they ate every leaf off of that. So this was the pressure in an area where we're trying to restore it and plant native species, right? So obviously we manage deer in this area now. So when we think about the scientific publications, we try to, not just do science for the fun of it, right? I'm a scientist, but to do it so that it's practically applied and share it. We assist with white-tailed deer workshops, as was mentioned earlier, and here I am tonight, right, trying to share scientific information. But we do conduct wildlife management. One last thing, I'll wrap this up. We also looked at contraceptives, right, because we try to adapt, look at new techniques, and we tried to look at contraceptives. So just a quick summary. From 2001 to 2006, before I started with the park, we spent almost $500,000 to use an immunocontraceptive to look at managing deer. And the primary goal was to assess the feasibility and practicality of reducing a relatively small isolated deer population. But we're also interested in not only the efficacy, right, the effectiveness of this, but also the effort, cost, and practicality of delivering a contraceptive under field conditions, right? In this day and age, we can contracept anything, you know, if we have it in hand in the right conditions. So the study was conducted at our OEC facility, which we thought was the most isolated. What we found was there's a lot of effort that goes into capturing deer. And if you have to continue to recapture them for retreatments, it becomes harder and harder to capture them because they don't like it. And it's a lot of stress on the animal as well. So time and effort, and effort means money. So this is part of the cost, right, is capturing these deer. But what we really found was this isn't a closed population. So new deer that were untreated, when we're trying to reach population target numbers to see a reduction over time, new deer move in, and our treated animals, expensive animals, move out, right? We can't control them, and it's not closed. So the takeaway from our test was that the free-ranging nature of the deer herd in the region, where both immigration and emigration take place, make it difficult to deliver the contraceptive to a large number of deer. So we know from our study, let me illustrate this and what I'm talking about. We know from our study, we had average annual home range from our radio telemetry data. So where does a deer move in an average year? So what's its home range? So that's an example of it. So if I look at Hinckley Reservation, and those are the deer we did an aerial survey, at that time, that's where those deer were standing, some inside, some outside, but that's where deer are. Those are my deer at that time, right? So John, you got to do something about them. Well, I can only do the deer that are within our boundaries at the time, right? But if I put that average home range around each animal, this is what I'm talking about free ranging, right? We're not talking about fixing potholes or utilities here. These are animals that have seasonal movement rates, seasonal food resources, and so they move, and they move freely. We want them to move freely. They're wildlife, right? Otherwise, they'd be domesticated. So that's where if you map that on that small isolated park, why this didn't work for us. But what I'm explaining is sometimes we hear about closed populations. So that might be an island, or that may be a secure federal facility in like Maryland where there's a high fence and you can keep animals inside and outside, right? But that's not the Cleveland Metro Parks because we're not a closed population. That's why we appreciate cities that look at this issue and not just us because we share deer. So we work with the state on our urban whitetail deer management. We have conducted wildlife management of deer since 1998. And ours is about protecting healthy, resilient forests, which may be different from cities. But we're not trying to stabilize populations with contraceptives. We've tried that. We're trying to remove deer to reduce damage. That's in the Cleveland Metro Park. So just some background. But again, I appreciate being here and I appreciate any discussion for what works for a community because these are national and state and regional issues. And I think, you know, having fact-based, honest discussions is good for what your situations are in your communities. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here and offer, you know, a perspective as a wildlife ecologist who's faced with this quite a bit. And that's my information. That's one of my friendly deer. So thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take questions when we're all done. Jeff has a presentation, shorter. Are you able to navigate to do what you need to find?
Or you guys weren't looking ahead, were you? All right. All right. So we're going to start with a question. I'm going to give you a second to think about this. How many communities in Northeast Ohio have a deer management program? Don't say it out loud. Think for your first second here. Everybody got their answer that's locked in? All right, answer 63. So you can see all the highlighted communities are the ones that have some type of deer management program. So again, my name's Jeff Westerfield. I work for the Ohio Division of Wildlife. One of my primary responsibilities with the agency is I work out of our Akron office and I oversee all of Northeast Ohio. And so one of the things I work intimately with is community leaders, administrations, to look at deer management, provide technical assistance on what options exist. And then because we're the regulatory authority over deer, depending on the type of management that's done, sometimes I'll do permitting, and then I obviously oversee any of those permits that I issue. And I work with, providing, again, that technical assistance to community leaders all the time. So one of the things that Jim had asked me to talk about is kind of data, and you'll see some good ties here to John's talk. We didn't sit down and plan this together, so but what I want to cover today is data types and thinking about that, and then how we utilize that data to inform deer management decisions. Because a lot of, John gave you a great background on how we got here, right? I'm kind of going to take this to the next level. Where do we go from here? And what kind of things do we use to make good decisions? So 2 things we're going to cover in my short talk here is the types of data that can be collected. And then how do we use that data? Because, right, if we're taking the time to collect it, we want to make use of it and ultimately use that data to help guide decisions. So when we think about the types of data to be collected, think of it like a puzzle, right? At the end of the day, we got this puzzle we bought off the shelf. The next step, once we get it home, is we got to break it open, pull all the pieces out. What do you do with the puzzle? The first thing you do, start flipping those puzzle pieces over, right? Because you got to see the picture. And so that's when we're looking at data and collecting data. That's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to understand the puzzle of deer and Cleveland Heights, what's going on. And we use this data to help kind of paint that picture and put that puzzle together. So some of the common, data that is collected in municipalities is deer vehicle accidents. That's a really easy one that we can take a look at. Typically that's through the police department, where the police department is dispatched because somebody hit a deer. They want to make sure there's a record of it. That way if the insurance company has any questions, they can rely back on that. So this is a pretty easy piece of information that can be collected through the police department. Another piece of information and data that we can collect, though, is through the service department. And we're actually finding that this is actually a much more valuable piece of information than even deer vehicle accidents. John had a great point, if you caught it, when he talked about those deer vehicle accidents. He said there's 20,000, recorded in the state every year, but that's not all of them. There's estimated 65,000 deer vehicle accidents each year, right? Because every deer that gets hit doesn't die right there on site. There's a lot of deer that get hit and they run off. They can go roads and roads and roads over, sometimes weeks before they actually succumb to the death. But ultimately when they die in your backyard, you probably don't want it there. So, oftentimes you contact the city will have service department go out there and remove that deer. So we're actually now leaning pretty heavily on this service department pickup because it paints a little better picture of what the number of deer vehicle collisions are in the community. And service departments can easily, keep a tab on their service department, as they're going out and how many deer were removed that way. So this is a really easy and actually, I guess, nobody here works for the Cleveland Heights Service Department, right? Okay, no hands went up, good. So, the police department's got a million things to do, so does the service department, but obviously the police department, get in there, get out as quickly as possible. The service department, again, is they're out there and they got to remove that deer and dispose of it. Usually some pretty good data we get off of this data set. The other thing that's really important is you guys, right? So surveying the residents to see who is having problems. Now, I've been around a long time. I've done this job for over 25 years. Over half of my career has been on this specific thing, working with municipalities. I can tell you that if we survey all the residents in Cleveland Heights, some people are gonna love deer, some people are gonna hate deer, and we're gonna have a lot of stuff in between, right? And so I don't really focus when we look at citizen surveys on what's everybody's feeling, because I know we're gonna have a split somewhere down the middle. And I can tell you from a lot of the surveys that have been done in other communities of where that split's going to be. However, what we spend more time on is looking at how many people in the city are having problems, right? If at the end of the day we do a survey and nobody responds, says, oh, nope, I don't have a problem. Do you have a problem? Nope, I don't got a problem. Everything's good, right? All's good in the world. So looking at what I kind of call a bias survey, because we just want to hear from the people that are having problems, paints a better picture of what the issue is, not trying to say, should we do X or Y, or, do you like deer or not like deer? Because again, very polarized. John pointed out, everybody's got opinions, right? He's, what'd you say, temperamental Irishman? Yeah, I'm not Irish, but I do have opinions, so everybody does. One of the things that I'm getting ready to roll out, this is the first time we've ever done something like this, is actually I'm putting together a statewide citizen survey that all communities can utilize for their residents to look at this exact topic. And the advantage is that we can actually take a look at some data correlating from one community to the next. But even more so, what happens oftentimes is that if in Cleveland Heights, they run a survey of you guys and say, hey, do you guys have problems? Anybody that lives close to the border, right? You may be dealing with deer on the other side in your neighboring community, but if we don't know what is happening over there, then that doesn't paint as clear of a picture, right? So the goal of this is to paint a clearer picture and know what's going on around you, not just simply right here as well, because that can help guide decision-making. This isn't something that I talk a lot about in municipalities, but another thing that we can use to collect data on is vegetation. John talked a lot about this with the park district and the data they collect in the park. If I have a community that doesn't have a ton of parklands, forest lands, I don't usually lean too much on this. However, in Cleveland Heights, you guys have some really nice parklands, right? So this is an opportunity to collect some data there as well to help guide decision-making. And this doesn't have to be something that's really labor intensive. In fact, I encourage a lot of times the involvement of the school system, the school science teachers to help, go to some of these sites and help collect data. It not only helps, get to John's point of them understanding the role of humans in the environment, but also makes them citizen scientists and helps them address and get that data and help guide decision making. So there's lots of different surveys. There's the big pictures, deer exposure, you can see inside versus outside, and we can do a lot of plot surveys as well. And so we can tackle that in many different ways. And then communities that have urban archery hunting, which there is a lot of them in Ohio, if that is something that's utilized, we can even take that and gather data out of that as well. So we can look at where those deer were removed to help guide decision making, and then also the numbers, because that can help paint a clear picture, as I'll show you here in a second, on how we utilize that data moving forward. And then the last thing, and I put this last because it's very intentional, is we can do surveys of the actual deer out there. John showed you a picture of, Hinckley and I think the other one was South Chagrin Reservation maybe, but all the dots on the map where the deer were. And this is another type of survey. There's lots of different ways to survey the number of, the deer, the actual deer in town. It's always a snapshot of, a snapshot of time. However, it again, provides a data point that we can sometimes utilize to help guide management decisions. So now we've got lots of different data that we can collect, go through and collect all that stuff. Some of it's easier than others, obviously, but how do we utilize that data moving forward? So I want to highlight this because it's important for everybody to understand. There are basically 3 ways we can do deer population management. That's through hunting, targeted deer removal, which oftentimes gets called sharpshooting, and then fertility control. Those 3 things are really our 3 tools for managing deer populations. And I put the $ on there because that kind of expresses where we're at monetarily for each of those types of things, right? Hunting is going to be done super simple and cheap, virtually, at a next to no cost for a community. Targeted deer removal or sharpshooting is a little bit more expensive, and then fertility control is even more expensive yet. So just keep that in mind. And I always tell communities that I'm working with, it's not try to focus on the one, but how can we incorporate each of these, potential into the situation of the process that we're going to move going forward. Okay, enough on that. So how do we take that data and make it useful? So we can do a very simple assessment using that data. So we can take, those numbers in the red circles there are those data that we collected. 25 deer vehicle accidents, 53 service pickups, 64% of the residents in the survey said they'd like to see fewer deer, right? We've got that data. So then we can simply say, okay, where are we at? What would we like to see, right? This is pretty easy. Some of this is you guys feeding that into your council folk. But, at the end of the council sitting there saying, okay, yeah, man, 25 deer, vehicle accidents seems high. The police chief saying, hey, I'm putting a lot of staff time towards this. I'd love to be able to have these guys on the roadways doing more speed control or whatever it is. So yeah, I'd like to see, a little less of that, spent towards that. So, we'd like to have a goal of 10, right? And these goals can fluctuate even yearly. So just like any other goal we have at home, right? I'd love to get 45 things. My wife says I make lists to for everything I do. I'd love to get 45 things done. And, sometimes I get 20 of those done. Sometimes I get 5, and usually I'm doing 6 more on top of that list I created, right? So those goals can change throughout the years. If your goal is higher than what you want it to be, backwards. If your goal is less than where you want it to be, right, we've got too many deer, right? So general point, arrows pointing at, probably need a population reduction in order to get these. We know from lots of, again, all those 63 communities that have various deer management programs, we pull that population down, we tend to see these types of metrics go down. So if we're above goal, we want to try to get to a population reduction. Now, if we're at goal or below, right, let's say we say, hey, man, we only had 10 deer vehicle accidents. Man, that was way less than we thought we were going to have. I mean, even if, nobody wants deer vehicle accidents, but, it's less than what we thought we would get, then maybe we're at population maintenance mode, right? We're not looking for a reduction. We kind of just want to toe the line there where we're at. So we can take this data and look at how the deer removals have an impact. So, the green bars are deer vehicle and service pickup data. We add them together, right? So we got some numbers there we can look at. We can take a look at the number of deer that are managed each year, right? And we can say, hey, okay, now we got something to work with. We got our goal number where we want to be. We're still above goal. I mean, you can see on this blue arrow, we go from, the deer removal somewhere in the 118 range. And the next year we go down to 58 deer. And what happened with our deer vehicle accidents service pickups? Stayed flat, right? Yeah, so go backwards. So that blue circle is saying, hey, all right, we reduced the number that we took and we kind of towed the line, but we're still above goal. So what do we need to do? Probably needed to take more than what we took this last year, right? So it helps guide our decision-making to what we need to do. We need to go a little more than what we did that 58 deer the previous year. So we can do some really cool stuff once we start getting all this data in, right? We can start doing some data population modeling, deer population modeling. And so we can take stuff like a helicopter count, right? That was our index that we had dots on a map, right? And we take a look at that number and we can pop it into this Excel sheet. And then we can take a look at what I call a recruitment factor. So this is how many deer, John talked about deer coming and going. This is your comings and goings, right? So it's pretty common in a city to see right around this 1.3 deer recruitment factor, which means for every deer that's out there, when we go to the next season, there'll be an extra deer that gets added into the mix, right? That population explosion, like John kind of showed, we have unchecked populations in an urban environment, that number is generally going to go up. So we can tinker with that recruitment factor a little bit and that initial population index number and start taking a look at what the numbers look like when we're modeling this out. And so we can easily go back and say, okay, so now we got our data, right? And we can take that helo count and we can add in deer vehicle accident data. We can take that and add in service pickups. We can take that just like that previous chart showing those different metrics that we're looking at and say, okay, if we took 50 deer out, what does that mean, right? That previous slide said, hey, we needed to take more. And we look at this modeling and it says, bingo, you're 100% right? Because if we took 50 deer, the next year we're expected to see a growth at about 294 deer. So we can simply take that same thing and start plugging in different numbers. And so we take in and say, hey, okay, so if we do 125 deer, what's that mean, right? we see 193, which is a reduction. So we can start taking a look at that and saying, hey, now we're heading in the right direction. We're going to have a lower number. We should see a decrease in our deer vehicle accidents. Our, people responding to our citizen survey should go down, and we should see, fewer service pickups. And if we're doing metrics like, vegetation in the parks and stuff, we should see that, being a positive effect moving forward. And then if we incorporate that hunting, right, that called number, we just add that number into whatever we're doing, hunting, sharpshooting, factor into, that number that are removed or called each year. All right. So fertility control, where does that fit into the whole mix? All right. So this is, generally this is a surgical sterilization fertility control. This is right next door to you guys in South Euclid. There's a picture of a deer. 153 was wandering around, right next door. And so this is, most of the fertility control work now really focuses on the females. Lots of work been looked at males, but, better or worse, guys, girls run the show. So we knew that anyway. So, when we do fertility control, we're really focusing on the females. And so in this case, the goal is to sterilize her so she can't have any fawns, right? And so how does that fix into the picture? Well, keep in mind that when we do that, she's still on the landscape, right? So when we're looking at that data collection of landscape damage or citizen issues or deer vehicle accidents, that deer's still out there on that potential to do that. So we got to keep that in mind. The goal is, is that under the sterilization side that she's not adding into the population, and at some point when she lives out her life, she will die, whether it be, of old age or she got hit by a car. Now she's off that landscape, right? But keep in mind, John talked about this immigration. I talked about this as well. So again, you guys all noticed Cleveland Heights there, right? So this true data, you can see South Euclid. This is so one of the things that we did, part of that South Euclid project is, those deer that had that number 153 ear tag, people that have, cited those deer, call them into me, and I keep a record of all those deer that are cited. And so we can take a look at where those deer were at. So here you can see, obviously the bulk of them in South Euclid, but what do you see outside South Euclid's borders? Right, deer move, right? So just like John showed that home range, when we especially get on those deer on the fringes, they're affecting both you and your adjacent communities. And you can even see, interestingly enough, on that far side of west side of Cleveland Heights, I don't know the number that, whether there's 1, 2, or 3 deer that are over there, but, deer, spending some time over on the west side of town. We expand that out to look at all the sightings we've had from that project, and you can see where we've had reportings here. So point and take home here is that deer move. So when we look at fertility control, you can't think of it as a vacuum. Like John said, this, Cleveland Heights isn't a walled city. We don't have fence all the way around. So these deer are coming and going. And just as these South Euclid deer are leaving and venturing out at times, it's not just a one-way street, right? Deer also come in the other direction as we're doing management efforts as well. So what does this mean when we look at fertility control is, if you can see here, we're adding in that sterilization aspect to the data that we're collecting, but we aren't removing them from the population, right? They're still on the ground. So, we start with 237 deer at the beginning, we remove that 50, we're at 187, not minus the extra 15 that are there. But what we see is this reduced recruitment factor, right? Because we're not having those does putting those additional fawns out on the landscape. So what it does is it helps pull down what's ultimately coming into that population in the following year. And so that's where the benefit is, but we're not seeing negative, right? We're not seeing, if we had below 1, we'd have, a negative production, but we always will have recruitment going on because of these deer coming and going and no borders that are holding them back. So I did pretty good. I'm usually way over time, but John stayed within time. I stayed pretty close. So ultimately, hopefully you guys see that, there's lots of different data that can be collected within a community. We take, I work with communities to help establish, ways to collect that data, how to set protocols up. But then we also take, and I provide my technical assistance to help look at some of that data and how we look at making that deer management decision. If it's, we're above, or if we're under goal on everything, then the action's no action, right? Nothing needed to be done. I would venture to guess when we take a look at Cleveland Heights, we start putting things together, probably going to see that there's a lot of deer out there, and there's probably some level of management that probably needs to occur out there. But at the end of the day, once we get that data and you start piling it in there, that's when we make the decision. It's not saying, hey, I can tell you today, I know there's a lot of deer in Cleveland Heights, but I don't live here, right? So I don't get that say. And whether I like deer or don't like deer is immaterial to this whole conversation, because it's you guys having, saying, hey, yeah, we're having problems, or it's, the city saying, hey, deer vehicle accidents or service department, we're having way too many pickups, that really drive whether, we need to do something. And then if you do something, what tools we use is a whole nother, conversation again within those three. And then ultimately to what level, we can utilize a lot of that modeling and looking at other communities to see how them utilizing that tool, help be beneficial. All right.
Thank you, Jeff. We should get a quick count of who wants to speak. The next step is going to be hear from you folks. Ask your questions. Gil, you're going to go ahead. He helps with the Shaker project. No. Although Jim Marino is not speaking tonight, I believe. Do we have any blank sheets left?
Yeah, they were right here on the desk.
Sure. Anyone else need a sheet that's going to speak? No. Anyone else need a sheet? Go ahead. All right.
11, it looks like 3 more. 14.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I was going to mention a little bit earlier, Jim works with some of our neighboring communities on their deer management programs, and I suspect some of your questions this evening, you may be curious on what some of our neighbors do. That's the value that Jim is bringing to the table this evening. We have 14, 15, it's going to be a long, Jim, you're with Precision Management. Do you have can I put you on the spot, and can you spend maybe a minute or two and explain what you do and what you do for some other cities? You're going to have to push the button.
So I'm with Precision Wildlife Management. I've been in the wildlife management business for about 10 years now. I previously was I'm sorry, can you hear me now? Okay, my apologies. I've been in the deer management and wildlife management business for about 10 years now. Previously, I was a lieutenant with the Shaker Heights Police Department, and prior to that, actually, I started right here in Cleveland Heights back in 1985. But I've been doing the deer management in Shaker for quite some time, and now most recently in Beechwood for the last 3 years. My program set up to where safety is the most important. My goal is to make sure that we are managing the deer by harvesting them in a safe manner, a humane manner, and that we are doing it as discreetly as possible. I don't know how many of you have ever seen me or my folks. You may have seen me driving up and down near the borderline of Cleveland Heights and Shaker Heights. Our program's been very successful. We've had minimum complaints concerning deer management. They usually involve somebody hearing a suppressed a gunshot. Other than that, now it's been just like I try to refer to it as cutting the grass. You have to do that because obviously if you don't do that, things get out of control. And it's worked very well. And I work with a pretty good team. I require my sharpshooters to pass the same test that the Ohio State, the OPATA certification for police officers, for SWAT, for their sharpshooting, and they train year round. So we're very committed to the community and making sure that we do this safely.
I had to remember to push the button. Thank you. You're going to run the timer. We mentioned 3 minutes, no more than 3 minutes. If you can keep your comments much shorter. If you've heard someone else speak and you agree with them, just say, I really agree with that person a lot. That's really good. We understand. And there will be more forums like this. Nobody's rushing into any kind of decisions. You know, I do want to just make a premise. There's some values that we have in Cleveland Heights. This is where I can't speak for my peers, but I mean, I believe we're peaceful people, we're professional, we're compassionate, and we're very, very concerned when we talk about guns. As a former school board person, knowing what our kids have had to deal with, knowing peers in other cities deal with school shootings, guns, in my opinion, don't belong in an urban setting. That's my opinion, but that's maybe, we'll just stick with peaceful in that. But why don't we get going? This is the committee working hard. Gail's going to call your name.
I'll do the time, and I'll waive this when you've got 30 seconds.
Yeah, you can't see the timer.
Timer is bad.
So,
John Barber.
Good evening. I'm John Barber from Bradford Road. I appreciate the opportunity to speak briefly tonight. What I say represents my own findings. I have over 50 years of experience in working with urban wildlife as a citizen scientist. I strongly encourage the city of Cleveland Heights to move forward quickly with the Department of Natural Resources to measure the deer population in Cleveland Heights, evaluate the public perception, explore implementing a deer killing program. Please do. Drivers in cars are now killing and maiming deer in all 12 months of the year. This is the fourth deer management protocol that Jeff did not mention. We are killing and injuring deer through collisions, causing many incidents of dead and crippled deer, damaged cars, emotional trauma for drivers and residents, and ugly work for the police department and public works employees. I analyzed over 5 years of data of Cleveland Heights police call reports using call codes related to deer. The city has had over 300 deer-related call reports in that time period, averaging 62 a year. The police had to shoot an injured deer 8 times a year. The Public Works Department had to send out a pickup crew on average of 26 times a year and disposed of deer carcasses in the landfill trucks. And these numbers are certainly underreported. I mapped that data on a city map, and it shows a very, very even distribution of police call reports. A high deer population will continually work against our efforts to increase tree canopy and improve the resiliency of our city. Let's work through the ODNR protocol for evaluating the deer population density. Working with ODNR, we can evaluate the efficacy of transferring our current deer killing program using our cars from random residents into the hands of professionals, lessening the maiming of deer, emotional trauma on drivers, and freeing up public employees' time. Please move forward with this.
Howard Meyer.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Howard Mayer. Name is pronounced Mayer, not Meyer. My address is 1397 Blackboard Road, been a homeowner in Cleveland Heights for more than 50 years. I've been on city committees for a number of years now. I was on the city's Transportation and Environmental Sustainability Committee when in 2022, we actually did a study, sent a recommendation to the city council for exactly what we're talking about today. A survey of the number of deer and also doing a community survey. I think that, and also we have data that shows that the deer population is throughout the city, accidents occur, or collisions really, of vehicles and deer throughout the city. As John ably mentioned, probably better than I could, or anybody else for that matter. It's a serious problem, and but it starts with data. We believe in metrics. If you have the data, then you can make informed public policy and do your deliberations in such a way that makes sense for the community. That's it. Thank you.
Diane Calta or Salta, C-A-L-T-A. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Diane Calta. I live at 1620 Oakwood Drive. I brought my husband with me tonight as well. I don't know that I could say anything better than what's already been said. Please move forward with the deer management program. I am beyond frustrated with the deer in my neighborhood. And we can talk about car accidents, but I have at any time through the year between 4 and upwards of 20 deer in my yard. They eat garden, they eat landscaping, they rub on trees, they have babies where we can't use parts of our yard. They are, they follow us, they are defensive. It's non-stop. I have tried to keep them out of the yard with deer spray. I have to change it. Usually I could keep them off of my landscaping until about the end of July. Now I can't do it at all. Our dogs really can't go in our yard. I hope we don't have any babies in our yard this year, because if we do, we'll have a mama that will just watch us and be threatening. And when we have time for them to mate, we have bucks. We have bucks that come up to our door. I mean, I can send you pictures. I have a whole album I put in my iPhone. They're beautiful. They are beautiful, but they are beyond destructive. Our dogs, again, we keep them on tick repellent all year long because I don't trust the fact that they can't go off of it. Luckily, we haven't had any issues, but there's plenty of disease. I will volunteer my yard. I will volunteer my time. If you want me to have a neighborhood meeting, please move forward with a program. You have the experts here. You've heard, collect the data, and you have the people that can move this forward. Do not get lost in a bunch of indecision. The deer population is out of control. When you go, I don't think you even have to do a deer survey, but go ahead and do it. You can come to my yard and you can hang out for 24 hours. If you want to put a tree stand in my backyard, you can. They'll be there right now when I go home. So I'm probably using up I have 30 seconds left. So my point is, if I can be a resource, if you'd like to use my yard, we back up to the old Oakwood Country Club, the golf course. So there's still about 50 acres of land back there. On my street, there's probably about 20 acres, and there's just way too many deer. And most recently, we had one that was, it had been injured. It was foaming at the mouth. The police had to be called. They came out. The police officer, interestingly enough, had never shot a deer before, but by all accounts, it was an easy shot because he was down on the ground. My neighbor had to actually then drag the deer from the backyard to the front yard so that it could get to the tree lawn to be picked up by the police department. So please move this forward quickly. And if I can be a resource, I'm here for you.
Jan Hart.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members. My name is Jan Hart, and my husband Ron and I live on 3304 Rumson Road. We've been there for 24 years. We own both our home lot plus a wooded lot behind our home, and that borders Mayfield Road. When we first moved here in 2001, we would see occasional deer in our property. Now we see a regular herd of 6 or 8 deer that frequent our yard as well as our back lot. They often sleep there at night. When we first moved here, there was thick undergrowth on that back wooded lot. We couldn't even see or walk through it to get to Mayfield Road. And now our back lot looks just like that picture, decimated, no underbrush at all. You can walk right through there. We had to limit the plants that we put out since the deer regularly eat the flower and the vegetable plant. And while it's discouraging the waste money on those kind of annual plants and the chemicals, we're mostly concerned about the forest preservation in our back lot. Nothing's being regrowing back there at all. I'm a retired nurse, grandmother of 5 little ones that play in our backyard. And so I have a concern for increased risk to exposure to deer ticks. And since Lyme disease is carried by deer ticks and white-tailed deer are the preferred hosts, areas that have lots of deer have an increased abundance of ticks. As well, the overabundance of deer has led to the practice in our neighborhood of intentionally feeding deer by putting out dishes of deer food. And that has provided a food source and attracted rats to our neighborhood. And that presents a health risk, as well as a negative impression. And so I would please move forward on this.
Wes Schaub.
I'm Wes Schaub. I live on North Taylor Road, and I also want to encourage you to do something about the deer population. I've had 14 doe in the yard at one time. They are wiping out everything. There have been 6 bucks in the yard, all buck rubbing on the trees. So they're making a mess out of that. My dog has already been trampled once by them rearing up and going after him. So please do something about the deer population in the city.
Fran Lissamore.
I'm Fran Lissamore. I live at 3095 Yorkshire Road, and it's okay to kill the deer. These population ecologists here will tell you it happens all the time in the real world. And it with, sharpshooters would be much less stressful for the deer, for 1 minute to be organic, free range deer, and the next minute they're down on the ground. I'm a bike commuter, and whoever sends out to pick up the carcass might not just be picking up a deer carcass if, things go occasionally, especially this time of year. And this habitat destruction, a lot of people don't think about that. I think John said that, there's so many more deer because we took away their habitat. No, we made habitat, and they're now, showing, the lack of understory. And shall we talk about chronic wasting disease? People have mentioned ticks, but that would be a lot worse if that, became an issue too. So yes, please cull the deer. Thank you.
Moshe Koval. Moshe.
So everything that was said was very informative. Do we have a responsibility to manage deer populations? If just looking at ecological perspective, you can say obviously that we do because we caused the problem. But I think if we're going to kill deer, and this isn't killing deer for food, which is a different, killing animals for food, that's a different discussion. But if we're going to kill deer just for the sake of lowering the population, I think you have to have, this is a serious ethics dilemma that you have to look at the reasons you're doing it. And it can't just be people complain about it. You have to look at the data. You have to survey how many deer there are. And in the article in Cleveland.com that was talking about the coalition of cities, the local cities that got together and decided to manage the deer population, there were a few reasons that were brought up that I think is never a good reason to kill animals. There was eating people's flowers. I get it. I'm a gardener. It's very hard to just keep trying to find deer-resistant plants, and if they're desperate enough, they'll eat anything. But I don't think that's a good reason to kill an animal. Giving birth in a yard, I understand, like scaring your dogs. My dog is terrified of everything. She's scared every time she sees deer. Again, that's not invasive animals is a serious concern, and I would highly recommend everyone to read the book Wild Souls by Emma Maris. She talks about the ethics of killing invasive animals. Talking about invasive animals, I will say that I think you have to be consistent, and cats are the most invasive animals in the world. They kill billions and billions of songbirds every year, but we're never going to cull our cats. So I think people have to be consistent with what they believe. I also think that obviously biodiversity could be a good ethical reason to kill deer, but that has to be the reason you're doing it. It can't just be scaring dogs, giving birth in people's yards, causing car accidents. Obviously could also be, I think, a good ethical reason to kill deer. But again, these are sentient animals. This is a serious thing. It shouldn't be a knee-jerk reaction. I think it should be, if nothing else works, then you have to kill animals. I don't think it should be a knee-jerk reaction to solve any problem.
Susan Eisler.
Hi, I live on the corner of Coleridge and Stillman, 2848 Coleridge. And when we bought our house 9 years ago, I put in this pretty little cedar fence, 2 and 3 feet tall. I had no idea the deer I would be getting. I put in hostas, I put in roses, I had twins born in my yard last summer, and they got the yard. They and mom got the yard, everything got eaten. I put up a wire fence that is not permanent, but it goes up to about 6 feet and it's keeping them out now. But I chased a pregnant deer out this spring with my dogs. We got her out, found out where she was coming in and closed that off. Do they use the meat? Do you? Yes. So you do donate it? Okay. So, and I think putting the hunting, you do hunting in Cleveland Heights, and what's the collateral damage of people? So we need targeted culling. I do have a question. They neuter the females. Why don't they snip the males? Any?
Hey, John, do you mind turning that? Thanks.
So biologically, if you look at it, and if you look at just population biology and the numbers,
Mm-hmm.
you remove the female before they have the average of two fawns every year.
Right.
That is that's population, that's math. There have been studies with contraceptives to actually you do tubal ligations on the males.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not familiar with any of that in Ohio, I don't think, but
Well, I just wondered because I had 9 in my yard this winter. This is before I put that fencing up. And there were 7 females, and then I saw them, I watched them from my bedroom window, and they all jumped up, and they were different sizes. There were young females and older ones, and they all started to run out. And 2 bucks came in from the back, from my neighbor's back. And I just wondered, there's so many more females than males. It would just, to me, seem easier to somehow neuter the males than, and you'd cover a lot of females that way. I don't know,
So I'll go back to John's maps that he had on the home ranges, right? Those were females.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at males, their home ranges are substantially larger. So that map that I had up that showed all those dots where the deer went from the South Euclid project,
Mm-hmm.
what I I didn't get into the nitty gritty of all the individual dots, but the one that was up in Ashtabula was a male. It was actually a male that was inadvertently captured when they were doing that work. So when that male was captured, I required them to put a tag in it because there was drugs in that deer. And should that deer get hit by a car or killed by a sharpshooting program or a hunter and be consumed, that would be potential, consumption of those drugs by that person. So that deer was a male that went all the way up to Ashtabula. And again, those are flowing things, right? So those bucks will move long distances to find females to breed with. So
But
even if we did all of the bucks in Cleveland Heights, there's lots and lots of bucks outside Cleveland Heights that will easily come into Cleveland Heights to breed those females. And one buck it's not a one-to-one deal. So
Right,
you will do a
right.
lot, right?
That's what I was thinking.
But-
If you neuter a buck, then there's 30 females who are not going to have babies.
Right, but if we stop it, it's the roadblock concept, right? And so we stop it at the female side, doesn't matter how many bucks come in, she can't have those fawns when we work with her.
And if you have 100 bucks and you neuter 99 of them, but it takes one.
Who can,
All those
impregnate 30 females.
You have to.
Right, okay. All right, well, thank you. And I think you should call them and donate the meat. Thank you.
Mike Ivano?
Thank you very much. Thank you for hosting this gathering. Thank you for all the sharing of information. My name is Mike Ivano. I live on Edge Hill, right against the Coventry Library area. And John started out somewhere early on talking about the idea that he would get calls asking the question, why is your animal in my backyard? And I love that point because I look around and see a whole room of wildlife managers in here, which is really cool. The fact that we are invested in this so much. No matter where our opinions are, there are animals, right? Our model, the North American model of wildlife conservation, means it's all of ours. This is a resource of ours. And so in this conversation, I love the fact that we are hearing and exchanging ideas. I also love the fact that there is action being presented. And if the data holds, right? If the data holds, I think action should be taken. Until which point the data holds that, hey, we did our work. I think that's great. What I would advocate for is making sure that all of us are able to be involved if we are deemed, if it's deemed appropriate, right? Hunting programs that allow citizens to be involved. I think there's always going to be a place in those spaces where we need service providers that could come in and do it exactly the way that I'm sure your service is doing it. But I know that there are other models out there, and certainly throughout Ohio. I'm newish to Ohio, right? Moved here a couple of years ago, just under 3 years ago, but originally from Minnesota. There are some spectacular programs in the state of Minnesota, and particularly I would advocate for people to look into Zone 701. That is Minneapolis-St. Paul, the Twin Cities, right? Friends of mine are active in that area, both as ecologists and as service providers through the Park Service, but they're also active hunters in those areas. And those individuals are permitted to hunt in safe spaces that won't have much human interaction. They are then certified as archery marksmen. They are made sure that they are going to be safe archers in those spaces, and they're given an opportunity to be involved in the management of the population. Those things also do two additional things for that community. Number one, well, bigger than the community even. Number one, there is a little bit of cash flow that is generated through that, supported within a nonprofit organization that actually helps manage a lot of that effort, so that there's local dollars and economy built from it. But the other thing is, of course, those individuals are licensed hunters, so those dollars get folded back into our conservation efforts and help support a lot of the great work that you gentlemen are doing. So I would highly advocate for a program if the data holds, up until which point the data says that we're done, and I would love to have an opportunity for us as citizens to be a part of it. So thank you.
Mark Perrin?
Thank you. My name's Mark Perrin. I've lived in Cleveland Heights almost 30 years. I live on Woodmere. I'm a neuroscientist in Healthfield, and I'm also a deer hunter. What I'd like to mention to everyone is what I think is the biggest problem for people in Cleveland Heights is that the deer population is a health issue. Cuyahoga has the highest number of Lyme cases in the state of Ohio. And I hunt in southern Ohio in a county that is 0. I'd also like to point out that the number of ticks that I personally have seen has gone up. So I never got ticks in my own yard. I have 2/10 of an acre. Now, in the past year, I've picked 3 different ticks off me. This is an issue that I think we need to address before we become like the northeast part of the country where there's a huge endemic Lyme disease pool in people. And it's particularly a problem for kids because kids are the ones going out and playing. Now, I'm very adamant in terms of the belief that we should cull the deer. Unfortunately, as a hunter, I realize hunting isn't going to be an option in Cleveland Heights because I have 2/10 of an acre. I see the deer in my yard. I would like to kill them. I know how to kill them, but it's not an option. No one would want me out with a shotgun shooting deer in the backyard. No one would want me with a bow and have a deer then leap the fence and go into their yard and die. A specific program of sharpshooting done in selected areas where they wouldn't be an issue for harming anyone or people noticing would be a great way to get that done. And personally, I would like to see the deer population in the city go towards 0 because they don't belong. They belong out in a different environment. And I'll just end there and thank you for taking my opinion.
Alfred Mansfield.
Hi, my name is Alfred Mansfield. I also live on Woodmere, and everyone has said everything that I would want to share with you this evening. I will tell you that we have herds of deer in our backyard, as many other people have mentioned, and it's just extreme. We also have grandchildren that live in suburban Minneapolis. The only time they see deer is looking out our front window. They don't have them up there. I'm sure they're in the area, but not in the numbers that we have here. So I would like to encourage the council to do the research, get the statistics that would support an action, and then undertake that action to help cull the deer population. I just hope that we don't come back here 2 years later and find out that we're having the same presentation again because the council took no action. So please seriously consider this and do something. Thank you.
Angel Fasolo.
Hi, my name's Angel Fasolo. I'm on Edge Hill. I'm a vegan, so I'm sure most people are going to think that I'm going to say don't take any action. But I'm in a household with venison eaters who don't hunt, and a household of scientists. And I do think something has to be done. There's not much I'm going to add without getting into a big spending all night talking science and ethics, both of which are very important. I do just want to say it's kind of multiple steps ahead. Yes, take some action and not just keep kicking the can down the road. But if you do start calling, I do like the comment about that you do donate the meat. I believe in to a food bank. I think Parma allows residents, when they know that they're going to have nights where they go out, that residents can come and collect and process the meat. Not saying that for everyone the ends justify the means, but to have that component worked into this so that some of the ethics and some of those sorts of things are being taken care of while you're also dealing with how are you going to manage the population. Thanks.
Tom Gibson.
Hi, my name's Tom Gibson. I live at 1836 Wilton Road. I have one very specific request. and that is to make it a misdemeanor to feed the deer. I have a neighbor who feeds the deer, and they cut a diagonal across my yard. I've had to replant my yard, but even more worrisome, and so all the reports of deer goring. My neighbor hand feeds them. I worry about what the deer will do when they get scared of me, or when I go in the backyard, when I do something. So seems like something pretty straightforward. Just pass a misdemeanor for feeding the deer.
Dean Seek?
Hi, I'm Dean Seek. I've lived in Cleveland Heights for over 50 years. I lived on Rydal Mountain for about 35 years and now on Bolton Road for 15 years. When I bought the property on Bolton Road, I went to a lot of trouble to put in fruit trees and berry plants, berry bushes of all kinds and so forth. And there are people here who have heard me complain about deer before, but sadly for me, it's really too late. They have just ruined my property. Bushes chewed up. They come up on the patio. They drag potted plants off of pedestals and break them on the patio floor. They are just a total and complete nuisance, pest in my notion. And I urge you, I appreciate very much to council folk who have supported this, this forum, given us the opportunity to express this. Over 2 years ago, I called adjoining communities and discovered that Shaker Heights, Beechwood, Lyndhurst, South Euclid, and more have addressed this problem. I do not know why Cleveland Heights has not, but we're here now, and I certainly urge you to do everything you can to cull this deer population. Thank you.
Elaine Skirvin?
I've been working out in the yard, can't move. My name's Elaine, and I live at 3146 Sycamore Road. A lot of you may not know that street because it's very short, but it's in the Lee Mayfield area. And I've lived there for over 27 years. And when I moved in, I did a lot of work planting shrubs, flowers. I've tried a vegetable garden. I used to have an apple tree in my yard, which I took down hoping that that would deter the deer, but of course it didn't. I've spent a lot of money on these things, as well as deer repellents, which, as everybody knows, works sometimes, and then you got to change it, and then some of those don't work. I would hope that Cleveland Heights, that promotes Cleveland Heights as a beautiful community with beautiful yards and homes, and those, as all of us can attest, is a real challenge these days. The reason I think part of the problem in my neighborhood was when the Walmart area was built and that green space disappeared, that the deer had to move somewhere. And I never had deer before that space was taken away. And we all know, and of course, last summer, I too had twins born in my backyard while I was on vacation. They moved out by the time I got back, but that wasn't the first deer I've had babies in my yard. So hope and encourage Cleveland Heights Council to do something, because I know this is not a new problem. I've been to meetings in past years about the same subject and nothing has happened. Thank you.
Sharon Holtkamp, you have a question only. Do you want me to read it, or do you want to come up and ask it? You got all the data and everything there, so.
Hi, I'm Sharon Holkamp. I live at 2306 Lamberton Road. And to Mark Perrin's issue, I'm most concerned about the Lyme disease. In 2017 to 2019, there were 11.2 cases of Lyme per 100,000 people, and in 2022, there were 18.9 cases of Lyme disease. That was a 68.8 increase in cases in the state of Ohio. And if any of you know people who have had Lyme disease or babesiosis, it's really pretty dreadful. So coming from an infectious disease background, I am worried about Lyme disease, and I'm wondering if you have seen or feel that there is a correlation between the increase in the deer population, the increase in the Lyme incidence. In the human population, it's white-tailed deer and mice who are carriers of the tick. Are studies being done to correlate Lyme and increased Lyme cases and the increase in the deer population? Whomever.
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, it's a probabilities thing, right? So, I mean, the more deer that are out there, the higher probability that a vector that is a part of that life cycle of deer tick certainly is going to be a player. The tricky thing is like dealing with West Nile virus or any insect driven disease is that it's very hard, right? So we could eliminate, not really eliminate, but drive deer numbers down to very low. It doesn't mean that we have eliminated the potential for tick because of that white-footed mouse situation and the fact that any mammal can be a host. It's just deer tend to be an easy host because they congregate at times at areas, right? So we've talked about this feeding issue. A gentleman mentioned about the misdemeanor for feeding ordinance. Well, when you feed, and CWD was chronic wasting disease was brought up as well. When we bring critters in close proximity to each other, you have increased potential that you're going to get that transmission. So, where John talked about, trying to, address some of that feeding and not doing that because that's not normal behavior, then that's certainly a concern. So in the rural areas, we still see, increase of Lyme disease and increase in black-legged ticks and that kind of thing as well. But when you deal with urban areas, we're dealing with more people, we're dealing with more deer, we're dealing with more deer congregating together. That certainly creates a situation that is not conducive to limiting the spread of ticks or Lyme disease.
I think, OSU, I cannot think of the researcher right now, but the Ohio State University definitely has a researcher that's been looking at ticks across the board and the increase in them beyond deer. And I'm not exactly up to speed on it, but I know the state of New York was looking at associations with your population numbers and Lyme and ticks and also related to management. I don't know if they have any findings or results, but those may be two areas. But your question is not a new one related to management and the increase in Lyme and ticks for certain.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else would like to say anything?
One more very quick question.
Can you go, because nobody who's watching this can hear.
One very quick follow-up question. When do you think this will be taken up by the council, the full council? You guys have been very generous with your time tonight to gain this information, to hear a little bit of feedback from the community. So I'd just like to know when this is going to be taken up by the council.
Well, it has to get through the committee first. I mean, that's how these things work, and then it would go to the council. But one of the things that we need to be aware of with our new form of government, council is a legislative and power of the purse organization. We don't have administrative control. That is up to the administration and the mayor's office. It's not up to council. But the issue here is the whole process, it has to take some time here. I mean, there has to be some surveys done. I mean, one of the things that, we haven't had a chance to address some questions to the panel, but one of my questions is going to be, okay, well, survey data, I mean, we really need to make sure that the data supports some particular outcome, whether it's calling, whether it's not calling. I mean, you sense there's a problem when a council member's, one of the biggest things we hear from council members is, what are you doing about the deer population? I mean, that is almost as big as the roads, okay? And to ignore that just is, we can't do our duty by sitting here and ignoring this. So we've got to get some process going. And the process involves surveys. If there is going to be any kind of action done that's lethal action, we need to get a permit from ODNR. And they don't give those up very easily. There has to be data that actually supports this. And calling typically happens in the wintertime. I mean, that's what we're finding. I would be absolutely surprised if everything aligns right, that there would be some type of program in place by the end of this year. I mean, one, there is concern from the administration. What was shared with me is they really want to get a better understanding of the sterilization programs. And they're very, very concerned about guns. So when I've had my conversations with the mayor, those were the two issues. We did ask the mayor to send a representative, someone who may be working with this. We didn't hear back from the mayor. The mayor's very, very busy. He's got a lot of things going. And we respect that. The mayor is the mayor, duly elected. But we're in a position right now where we can get stuff kind of going. We can legislate things, we can discuss legislation about the feeding. We can work on getting data. So we can get our ducks in a row, per se. And we could do that on our own to get a sense. I think any reasonable person, I mean, we can do some of the initial work. We'll continue, have an open door policy. Anyone from the administration that wants to be a part of anything that we do, they are more than welcome to join us. I think over time, you may see that. I also want to make sure, I'm maybe jumping the gun a little bit here, just a show of hands so I can get a sense of the areas in the city that are being represented. Who would you refer? Okay, if you would consider yourself living in the north side of the city, can I just see a raise of hands?
What's the north side?
North of Mayfield. The western part of the city. Yeah, south. I guess south, that's probably the easier. Okay. Okay, so it's reasonably.
If you did it by school, elementary school, much better.
Yeah, but that was 7 things, but I thought, I was really mostly concerned about the northern part of the city. That part of the city continually feels to be underrepresented, and I wanted to make a special effort to make sure that they were included. I see 2 hands, which.
Hi, my name is Audrey Hudak. I'm on Queenston Road. Just an easy question. What can we as citizens do to help you move this forward?
I don't feel like answering that until we can all kind of talk about this, okay? Okay. Any other? One sec, Mike.
I just had a quick thought, and that is, what if the citizens of Cleveland Heights plagued by a gang that came into our yards, tore apart our properties, terrified us, gave us diseases or threatened to, and killed our animals? Would you take that seriously?
A very, very good point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, when I was looking at the concentric circles that you guys presented, how the deer move, it just seems kind of logical to say that the next step would be that this is a regional issue, and that, you know, if you do it anecdotally, you have much less of an impact. So my question is, have you had any experience with communities coming together to do this together, and how does that work?
I will just say that's one of the reasons why I'm here, because we can distinctly see in when I look at data within our parks, the areas that are further away from neighborhoods where we can have management and keep deer at a maintenance level, we have control. But if there are the cities that allow feeding or don't conduct any management, we don't see our numbers go down, and I feel like we're fighting a fire on those borders. And so we in the Cleveland Metro Parks work with the Division of Wildlife to understand, when we look at our data, where we have more impact and where we're kind of just defending, you know, for those communities that really aren't doing anything right now. So I'll just chime in with that from my perspective.
So I'm not aware of any other, but Cleveland or Shaker Heights and Beechwood have taken a collaborative approach, and they've been taking the lead on trying to start a regionalized program. They've reached out to multiple communities. We're glad to see that, you know, Cleveland Heights is taking it very seriously. And just from my perspective of harvesting deer in Shaker Heights, it's hard for me to hold the line on the north side of the city. There's a lot of deer.
I think it needs to be said, in preparing for this, I talked to Jerry Chaikin, who is the Chief Administrative Officer for the city of Shaker, and was encouraging us to jump on. But that, again, would not be a call that council would be making. That would be a call that our administration would be making. I think we would encourage that. I would like to just, can you be really quick? Because we're getting short on time, and I'd like the opportunity.
Could it make sense to do this at the county level? If we could get this done at the county level, would that have more impact?
I would reflect back to that LEAP statement that was now 12, 15 years old that said this is a regional issue. So we really have to look at the deer. I think the bigger you can make this, because deer don't stop at the border, the more effect we're going to have overall, including the no feeding and thinking about the human influence.
I'd like to, just sort of in the interest of time, I'd like to sort of open up the conversation now for our committee while we have the panelists here. And I'd like to introduce Gail Larson, who has a statement.
Thank you. The Deer Management Education Workshop, where we met all three of you, was excellent, and it gave me the initiative to really want to participate in this process. I'm grateful to be on this committee at this moment in time in Cleveland Heights, and having Chairman Posh move this forward. So thank you for doing that. We were given information at that workshop about the issues surrounding urban deer populations, options to consider, and how to develop a plan to address the issues. Data collection, which we've talked about a lot tonight, is very important before the committee makes any decisions. We need to gather data from our police department, our public works department. Chairman Posh has reached out to both Chief Britton and Director Clinkscale. The frequency of deer vehicle collisions is overwhelming and heartbreaking, especially on the incident reports that describe citizen reports of injured or sick deer. In 2022, the Transportation and Climate and Environmental Sustainability Committee recommended the city pay ODNR to establish a baseline of the number of deer in Cleveland Heights. At that time, that would have cost $1,700. There is some discussion right now among the experts about the accuracy of the counting of the deer, but we will probably be looking at that as an option in committee. If available, the data regarding complaints about deer would also be helpful to us. So that is one thing that you can do, is make sure if you have an issue, file a complaint with the Mayor's Action Center or along those lines, or send it to us, okay? In addition to collecting data from our public safety and public works departments and a possible deer count, we were advised to conduct a citizen survey prior to any decision making. I definitely support that action, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Jeff is producing. Once we have the data, we need to make a decision. We have the following options that could be combined to develop a deer program plan. We could always do nothing. That is an option. We could educate the residents and tell them not to feed the deer and pass legislation to do so, as Chairman Posh has suggested. There's birth control and sterilization. There are professionals that will harvest the deer, and definitely for the ethics of it, that meat needs to be donated unless the animal is sick. And the combination of sterilization and targeted harvesting. If the committee decides to proceed, I would recommend we reach out to the experts to develop such a plan. It's been offered for that technical assistance, so thank you for that. And the best way to communicate that plan to our residents. If we put an action plan in place, we were encouraged to review the plan annually and report updated data so that you're always getting updates as to how it's working, if it is or isn't working, and what's been effective. This is a very transparent process, and all three of us and the rest of council will make sure that happens transparently. Please continue to reach out to us, and your input really matters. So thank you all for coming tonight.
Well, I think that's something that we can talk about. Council has a web page that is run by our clerk. Maybe we could have an update that we can post there. I mean, I do think it's important. I mean, just the efficacy of this is just overwhelming. And I think we need to be very, very careful, very transparent. And I do think we need to have more opportunity to hear some additional sides to this story. We have a pretty overwhelming majority here this evening that wants us to move forward quickly with the deer, with the management program. There was a gentleman that walked out. He looked like he was upset. I would have loved to hear him. I was kind of afraid maybe he felt like he wouldn't be comfortable, and I would have hoped he would have. But there's going to be multiple sides to this, and I do think we need to sort of tease that out and better understand it. We can't delay this like it's been delayed in the past. Don't get me wrong with that. What I'd like to propose for the agenda for our next meeting, and I don't have it here in front of me, it's the second Tuesday in May. We could notify everybody the 13th.
What time? You know the date and not the time?
Well, I didn't think we'd be this close to the time, and we really need to respect the time and end this meeting. But I believe it's 5:30 on the 13th, and I believe it is a Tuesday, but we will notify. I'd like to have an agenda item, and I'd like to check with Jeff, your schedule. Maybe we can get on a Zoom call with you and talk about a survey, just so we have a little bit better understanding of what that means. You have the tools, you made this available, you were on the verge of announcing it. I don't know if it's too premature to get us into your pilot program, but I'd love to be able to get something like that out so the community can tap into it, get some feedback, we can hear real life stories. I will tell you a piece of data that I haven't shared, and it kind of goes along with John Barber's statement. When I reached out to the police chief, he said that there was 300 incidents over the last 2 years. So we need to get some clarification on that. These are calls into the police department regarding deer issues. That's 300. That seems to be a big number, but I don't know. I mean, I think this is why we'd want to, run that by our representatives from ODNR. It looks like, Gail, you're trying to boot up real quickly to find out when that meeting is actually. Pardon me? It's 5 to 6. 5 to 6 on the 13th? Thank you, Angel. 5 to 6 on the 13th. Boy, if I was good at running this meeting, you'd think I would have known that. But at this point, if there's no other questions that the committee has or statements from the committee, I would like to thank everybody for coming. I really appreciate the fact that everybody was extremely respectful regarding this is a serious, serious topic. I mean, when we talk about any life, and I'm really appreciative on the way that everybody has come in here and handled themselves. I'm really, really proud to be a member of this community, just saying. And I really want to thank our panelists. So with that, we'll adjourn the meeting.